I was standing in the middle of my father's retirement party surrounded by his colleagues. And he, Mark the respected engineer, was standing over the wreckage of the legacy desk I'd spent a month building for him. His face was a deep, furious purple. "You are a dirty carpenter," he yelled, pointing the hammer at me so everyone could hear. "You lied to us. You are no longer my daughter." I looked at the guests. They just stared. I looked at my sister, the perfect lawyer. She was studying a spot on the carpet. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. The part of me that wanted his approval had just shattered along with that desk. I looked him right in the eye, and I nodded. The sound of the sledgehammer hitting the solid walnut was sickening. It wasn't just a crack. It was a final wet thud as the wood splintered. All my work, all those hours, all that hope, just gone. The room was dead silent. Every guest at that retirement party, all my father's colleagues and our family friends just watched. I looked at my sister Chloe, the perfect lawyer, the golden child. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at a crack in the hardwood floor as if it was the most interesting thing she had ever seen. I looked at my mother Susan, who was clutching the pearls at her neck, her face pale. And then I looked at my father Mark. His face was a deep, furious purple. He was breathing heavily, the sledgehammer still in his hand, a look of righteous victory on his face. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It clicked. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask him why. The part of me that craved his approval, the part that had spent 28 years trying to be good enough, just evaporated. I looked him right in the eye. "All right," I said. My voice was calm. It didn't even waver. It was the calmest thing in that entire chaotic room. I turned around. I didn't run. I walked. I walked past the silent, staring guests. I walked past my mother, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked out the front door, the same door I had walked through my entire life, and I felt nothing. I got into my truck. I didn't slam the door. I put the key in the ignition, and I drove. Not fast, just steady. I didn't go to my empty, sterile apartment, the one they were all so proud of me for. I drove to the industrial part of town. I drove to the one place that was actually mine. I parked in front of the heavy corrugated steel door and got out. I unlocked the deadbolt, pushed the door open, and stepped inside the Coyote Creek workshop. The air inside was cool, and it smelled like my life. It smelled like sawdust and linseed oil and potential. It smelled like truth. I sat down on a workbench surrounded by stacks of raw timber, half-finished chairs, and blueprints. My real work. My real legacy. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up my face in the dark. It was 10:07 p.m. I didn't text. I called my private banker. I knew he was on the West Coast. He'd still be working. He picked up on the second ring. "Maya, what's going on?" "Hey, David," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Apologies for the late call. I need to action something immediately." "Of course," he said. "What's up?" "That line of credit," I said. "The $100,000 one. The one I personally guaranteed for Mark and Susan." There was a pause. "Okay, I have it here." "What about it?" "I need you to freeze it," I said, "as of right now. Cut off all access. Yes, immediately. Irrevocable." "Maya," he said, his voice cautious. "That's a major move." "Are you sure? Is this a misunderstanding?" "No," I said, looking at a beautiful piece of cherry wood waiting to be carved. "There's no misunderstanding. I'm just balancing the books." I hung up. I sat there in the quiet of my workshop. The anger I felt wasn't hot and loud like my father's. It was cold. It was clinical. For my entire life, I had been the silent investor in their version of a perfect family. I'd been paying for a subscription to their approval, and the price just kept going up. Tonight, they hadn't just smashed a desk. They had defaulted on the agreement. My compassion had been a resource they had overdrawn for the last time. This wasn't a breakdown. This wasn't revenge. It was just accounting. To understand why I could make that phone call, why I didn't cry when that desk shattered, you have to understand the system it was built on. My family wasn't a family, it was a corporation. And in that corporation, my sister Chloe and I were given our roles from day one. Chloe was the flagship product. She was the achiever. She got straight A's. She was captain of the debate team. She was the future corporate lawyer. Every dinner conversation was about her. Did you hear Chloe won the state championship? Chloe's internship is already paying her a bonus. Chloe is going to be a partner by 30. She was the asset. And I was the liability. I was the dreamer, the failure, the odd one. While Chloe was reading case law, I was in the garage covered in sawdust. I liked fixing things. I liked taking something broken, an old chair, a wobbly table, and making it strong again. I liked the smell of cut pine and the feel of sandpaper in my palm. My father, Mark, an engineer who only respected things he could measure, despised it. I remember when I was 16, I spent a month building a small, intricate bookshelf. I used dovetail joints, which I'd taught myself from an old book. I was so proud of it. When I showed it to him, he just grunted. He kicked the base of it with his steel-toed boot. "What a waste of good lumber," he'd said. "This is rubbish, Maya. It's a hobby. Even worse, it's not even work for a woman. Go help your mother with dinner." When I told him I was thinking of applying to a fine arts program for woodworking instead of law school, he didn't just say no. He laughed. He actually laughed in my face. A carpenter, he'd boomed. "You want to be a dirty carpenter. Don't be ridiculous. You'll be a lawyer like your sister." For years, I thought it was just cruelty. I thought he just hated me. But sitting there in the silence of my workshop, I realized it was never about me. It was about the system. Psychologists have a name for this. It's called the role casting trap. In families like mine, each child is assigned a part. And the most important rule is that you can never break character. Chloe had to be the achiever because her success was my father's ego. And for his achiever to shine so brightly, he needed a failure to contrast against. I was his background, his shadow. My role was to be the before picture so Chloe could always be the after. He didn't hate my passion for woodworking. He was terrified of it because a successful independent carpenter didn't fit the role he had written for me. My success on my own terms would prove his entire system was a lie. That's what last night was about. Smashing that desk wasn't just about smashing a piece of furniture. He was trying to smash the character who had gone off script. He was trying to force the failure back into her assigned role. But the failure had just cut off his credit line. So I played the part. I went to law school. I hated every minute of it. I hated the sterile classrooms, the smell of old books, the endless arguments about things that didn't feel real. But I did it. I graduated. I passed the bar. I got a job at a respectable firm in a glass tower downtown. My parents were ecstatic. Not happy for me, but happy for themselves. They could finally tell their friends that both their daughters were successful. Chloe, the corporate litigator with the six-figure bonus, and Maya, the associate at a downtown firm. It was all a perfect, respectable lie. Because I was living two lives. From 9 to 6, I was Maya the associate. I wore gray pantsuits. I sat in a beige cubicle and I moved numbers around on spreadsheets. I was miserable. I was suffocating. The air in that office was so filtered, so dry, it felt like it was sucking the life out of me. But at 6:01, I'd get in my truck, I'd change into jeans and work boots, and I'd drive to the Coyote Creek workshop. I'd slide open that big steel door and I'd breathe. I kept a secret ledger, not just for my business, but for my life. On one side, there was the lawyer life. The salary was good, but the cost was, well, it was my soul. On the other side was the carpenter life. It didn't make much money to start, just a few $100s for a chair here, a custom bookshelf there. But I was alive. While my parents were at country club dinners bragging about Chloe's bonus, they had no idea that their own finances were a house of cards. I found out by accident. An email meant for my father got forwarded to me. It was from their bank. Final notice foreclosure auction. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. They were about to lose the house. The house I grew up in, the house they held that party in. I called my dad, panicking. "What is this?" He was quiet, humiliated. "It's nothing," he muttered. "The market is down. Your mother's medical bills." He didn't ask for help. He didn't have to. His pride wouldn't let him. So I, the failure, the dreamer, the dirty carpenter, I fixed it. I went to my secret bank account, the one from the workshop, and I transferred $40,000 to the bank, covering all their arrears and penalties. Just like that, anonymously. They never asked where the money came from. They just assumed a bonus from my law firm. They accepted it. And they never said thank you. But that wasn't my biggest mistake. A month later, my father called me. His voice was suddenly warm, proud. "Maya," he said, "your mother and I need to do some restructuring." The bank said a line of credit would be smart. Just $100,000 for emergencies. They just need a co-signer, a guarantor. He didn't ask Chloe the achiever. He asked me. And I, stupid, desperate for even a crumb of his approval, said yes. I walked into that bank as a lawyer, and I signed my name. I legally tied my entire financial future, my workshop, my savings, my real life to their sinking ship. And for 4 years, I carried that secret. The secret that I wasn't just the failure. I was the only thing keeping the achievers afloat. I slept on a cot in the workshop that night. I woke up to the smell of sawdust and the buzzing of my phone on the concrete floor. It was 7 a.m. I looked at the screen. My mother, Susan. I let it ring. It stopped. Then, immediately, it started again. I sighed and picked it up. Hello. It wasn't a hello. It wasn't an apology. It was a shriek. "Maya, what did you do? What did you do?" The bank. Mark's card. It's declined. For his blood pressure medication, how could you? I was quiet. I listened to her hyperventilate. I could hear my father yelling in the background. Then the sound of the phone being wrestled away. "You," my father's voice was a low growl vibrating with a rage that I knew so well. "You ungrateful. You think this is a game. You think you can just cut us off after everything we've done for you, after the education we gave you. An education I thought that I was still paying off. An education he had forced on me. You will turn that credit line back on," he commanded. "You will do it now." I said nothing. "Did you hear me?" he roared. I pressed the red end call icon. My phone immediately lit up again. Dad. I swiped to decline. It lit up again. Mom. Decline. A text message popped up. It was from Chloe, my sister. Maya, please call me. They're going crazy. This is a mess. I put the phone on silent and set it down. The panic wasn't for them, it was for me. Because in that cold, quiet moment, I remembered the guarantee. That $100,000 line of credit. I hadn't just given it to them, I had guaranteed it. My name was tied to their house. My signature was on that loan, legally binding my assets, my workshop to their debt. Smashing that desk was an emotional attack. Disowning me was a personal one. But that guarantee, that was a legal cage. And I had walked right into it. I wasn't calling my banker for revenge. I was calling my lawyer for survival. I found a lawyer that same day. Not a family lawyer, a contract lawyer, a litigator. Her name was Julia. I sat in her glass-walled office, the polar opposite of my workshop. I don't want their house. I told her, my voice as steady as my hand on a chisel. I don't want their money. I want my name off their paper. I want to be surgically removed from their lives. Can you do that? She looked at the guarantee I'd signed. She nodded slowly. This is tight. You're the primary guarantor. But you said you paid off a $40,000 lien for them. Yes, I said. And I have the bank statements to prove it. Good, she said. That gives us leverage. I left her office feeling cleaner. This was no longer a family drama. It was a contractual dispute. 1 week went by. I lived at the workshop. I filled 3 new orders. The smell of sawdust was my therapy. Then Julia called. Her voice was different. It wasn't the calm, professional tone from our meeting. It was sharp, urgent. Maya, she said, can you talk? Yes, I said, setting down my sander. What's wrong? It's worse than we thought, she said. I pulled the full title history on your parents' property, including all secured debts. The $100,000 line of credit you guaranteed is there. That's bad. But that's not the worst part. I waited. 3 years ago, Julia said, and I could hear her tapping on a keyboard, a second loan was taken out against the house. A home equity line of credit, a HELOC, for $50,000. Okay. I said, not understanding. So they're in more debt. No, Maya, Julia said, and her voice dropped. The bank sent me the signature page from that application. It required both property guarantors to sign. My blood went cold. I never signed that. There was a long, heavy pause. I know, Julia said. I'm looking at your signature from the first loan, and I'm looking at the signature on this $50,000 one. It's a forgery. A very good one, but it's not yours. I sat down on a stack of lumber. I couldn't feel my legs. Maya Julia said they didn't just lie to you. They didn't just use you. They stole from you. They forged your signature on a federal bank document. This isn't a family problem anymore. This is fraud. This is a crime. Julia's call set things in motion with terrifying speed. Once the bank was notified of the forgery, it wasn't a family matter anymore. It was a high-priority risk. They didn't just freeze the $50,000 HELOC. They froze everything. Every account Mark and Susan had. The original $100,000 credit line I had guaranteed was shut down, and a formal demand was issued. The fraudulent $50,000 was due immediately, in full. I knew this because Julia told me. I didn't know how my parents were handling it until about 3 days later. I was finishing a custom mantelpiece, planing the edge of a solid oak beam when I heard it. A frantic, desperate banging on the big steel door of the Coyote Creek workshop. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a fist. Bam, bam, bam. I turned off the planer, the sudden silence ringing in my ears. The banging came again louder. Maya, Maya, we know you're in there. Open this door. It was my mother's voice, thin and shrill with panic. I wiped my hands on my leather apron sawdust sticking to my palms. I walked to the door and pulled back the small metal grate I used as a peephole. There they were. My father Mark, his face pale and blotchy, not purple with rage but gray with fear. My mother Susan was openly sobbing, her hair a mess. They looked small. They looked weak. I unlatched the heavy deadbolt. The door slid open with a metallic groan. They stood there blinking in the bright sunlight, staring into the shadows of my workshop, my world. Maya, thank God. My mother lunged forward, trying to grab my arm. You have to help us. They've frozen everything, the bank. They're calling about the house. They're saying fraud. You have to call them, my father said, his voice hoarse. He wasn't yelling, but he was trying to command. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you signed it. Tell them to stop. I just looked at them. I didn't say a word. I reached back to the workbench behind me and picked up a single sheet of paper. I held it out to them. My father squinted at it. What? What is this? It's a copy, I said, my voice quiet, of the HELOC application, the one for $50,000. My mother's sobbing stopped. She stared at the paper as if it was a snake. Look at the signature, Dad, I said. He looked down. He saw his own forgery. He saw his crime on paper, held in the hand of the daughter he had called rubbish. His face went from gray to white. You're going to let us be homeless, my mother whispered, her face crumbling, over money. We're your family. I looked past her at my father, at the man who had held the sledgehammer. He used a sledgehammer, I said, almost to myself. My mother looked confused. What? I looked right at my father. At the party. You used a sledgehammer. Maya, what are you talking about? He stammered. Psychologists have a name for what you did, I said, and my voice was as cold and sharp as a fresh blade. It's called symbolic annihilation. You weren't just smashing wood, Dad. You were trying to destroy the evidence. The proof that I could be valuable without your approval. That I could build something you couldn't control. It wasn't an act of strength. It was an act of terror. He had no answer. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say. You're right, Mom, I said, turning to her. It is about money. The $50,000 you stole. The $40,000 I paid to save this house. And the $100,000 I was stupid enough to guarantee. I took a step back, my hand on the heavy steel door. Will I let you be homeless? I said. No, I'm just balancing the books. Maya, wait. My father pleaded, his hand reaching out. My lawyer will be in touch, I said. And I slid the door closed, locking it from the inside. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The legal battle was messy, but it was decisive. With the forgery confirmed, my parents had no leverage. They lost the house. The bank seized it to cover the fraudulent $50,000 loan and the balance of the credit line. My lawyer, Julia, was ruthless. She made sure my name was cleared, my liability was erased, and the $40,000 I had paid to save their home was returned to me from the foreclosure sale. They were facing criminal charges for the fraud. I didn't have to testify. The bank records did all the talking. I was in my workshop a few days after I'd last seen my parents when I heard another knock. This one was different, soft, hesitant. I opened the door, and there was Chloe. She wasn't the achiever anymore. She wasn't the powerful corporate lawyer. She looked tired. She wasn't wearing a power suit, just jeans and a sweater. "Can I?" she asked, motioning inside. I nodded, and she stepped in, looking around the workshop with a kind of wonder. "I'm not here to apologize for them," she said, her voice quiet. "Nothing can apologize for what they did. They lost the house. It's done." "I know," I said. She sat down on the same workbench my parents had stared at in horror. "I need to tell you why I was silent," she said, looking at her hands. "At the party, and for years, I waited. You think you were the one in the trap?" she said, and a bitter little laugh escaped her. "Maya, I was the real prisoner. You were the golden child, Chloe." "Was I?" she said. "Or was I just the most expensive possession they owned I was drowning? You have no idea what it's like. It's a concept. The golden handcuffs. That's what they call it. When your job, your life pays you so much, gives you so much applause, you can't leave. That six-figure bonus, that was my prison cell. Every time I thought about doing something else, something real, I'd hear Dad's voice bragging about me. I was just a well-paid puppet. I was terrified of becoming a disappointment. Like you." She looked up at me, and her eyes were full of tears. "At least you were brave enough to be a disappointment." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an old, folded bank statement. She slid it across the workbench. "But that's not the real reason I was silent," she said. "I was silent because I was a coward. And I was complicit." I unfolded the paper. It was a transfer receipt from her personal account to the business account for this workshop, dated 5 years ago, for $5,000. I remembered that. It was the exact amount I needed for the security deposit. It had shown up in my account anonymously. I thought it was a bank error, a miracle. I couldn't breathe. "Chloe, you knew." "I've always known, Maya," she whispered. "I've been watching you build this place from afar. I was so jealous. I couldn't quit my job, so I funded yours. Just a little. It was the only brave thing I ever did." "Why did you stay silent at the party?" "Because," she said, "the tears finally falling, if I defended you, he would have looked into my finances. He would have known I was a traitor. I was afraid. I'm so sorry, Maya. I was so afraid." I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time. The achiever and the failure. We were both just roles. I sat down next to her. Months passed. Mark and Susan took a plea deal. They avoided jail time, but they lost everything. They moved to a small apartment across the state. I haven't heard from them. I'm in the workshop. The sun is streaming in, lighting up the sawdust. I'm looking over a new blueprint for a beautiful, intricate library. A new voice calls out, "Do you think we should use a dovetail joint here, or a mortise and tenon?" I look up. Chloe is standing there, a pencil behind her ear, her old pantsuit long gone, replaced by a dusty apron. She quit the law firm a month ago. "Let's try the dovetail," I say, smiling. "I'll show you how. We're building our own legacy. Sometimes the people who were supposed to build you up are the ones you have to break free from." If you've ever had to choose your passion over applause, share this story. You're not alone.